I'm Catherine Sharon, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. Today's guest is a human performance coach who helps athletes, individuals in business, and corporations to tap into their inner potential. John Haime is a graduate of Purdue University in Indiana, where he studied business. He has been working with athletes in the area of mental and emotional development for more than 15 years. He is also the author of 2 books. The first, You Are a Contender. The second, Ride Big. In addition to that, he is also the founder of the Serge Giroux Golf Dream Classic. John, welcome to the show.
Catherine, what a pleasure to be with you. And what an introduction. Holy geez, you're making me sound really good.
Well, I think you are. So I hope that the introduction lives up to, what I know you have done. So I always like to start with, let's go back to your early days. I know that your father was a golf professional at a pretty major golf club here in Ottawa, where I was born and raised. And I would imagine that that shaped your early years. So let's go back to, where it all started for you in terms of participating in sports and developing dreams and goals.
Holy geez, Catherine, that's a long way back. I grew up in a sport family. My dad, like you said, was a golf professional. My brother currently is a golf professional. And it led me actually to professional golf. When I grew up, I loved all sports, but because we had the opportunity to have my dad as a coach, and he was a great coach, my brother and I developed some aptitude in golf. So I started to stand out, I would say, by the time I was quite small when I was younger, so I never stood out. But when I got to be about 16, I grew a little bit and I really started to stand out in golf. I realized I had some talent and I had some ability at it. So that led me to become one of the best amateur golfers in the country. And I did go to, like you mentioned, I did go to a school called Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, on a full athletic scholarship, which at that time was unusual for kids to have a full athletic scholarship. So I proceeded through college. I did well in college. I played well, loved Purdue, loved the school, loved everything about it. And I turned pro out of college. And then I ended up playing professional golf for about 5.5 years. In the 4th year, I was in Asia playing in a tournament, and I injured my hand. In one of the countries, I was trying to hit a shot, and I kind of rattled. I tried to hit the ball, and the club stopped, and I hit a root of a tree. And so that became a problem because it was really difficult, beyond that to not play in pain. So I was having a pretty good time, though. I was doing pretty well as a professional golfer, and but with pain and not quite getting to where I wanted to go, I stepped out, and like you said, I got into business. So after my professional golf career, it was a difficult time for sure because, golf was all I knew and I loved it. And it really, and a lot of people go through this. A lot of athletes especially go through it when they have to stop playing, and it becomes a very difficult period. But I did kind of pick myself up. I got into business. I worked for a friend of mine in Ottawa. He was in a trade policy consulting firm. And that kind of led me through a very serendipitous path through business where I met some people who were delivering leadership programs to organizations. So I sort of linked up with them, and that's what I started to do. So that was my first sort of introduction into performance. I did that, and then I was hired by a company in the US called the Hague Group to deliver a particular program that I built around golf, around emotional intelligence, and around some other subjects too. And I delivered that program around the globe for a number of years. Now, the sport angle comes in. I was working in Asia, I was working for a CEO. I was helping him with some of his issues. I was coaching him. And this was probably, 6 to 8 years later. But he asked me to help his daughter, who was a tennis player. He said, just do the exact same thing with her that you're doing with me. So that led me over a 2 year period to start building a process for athletes around sport and around sports psychology. So I got certifications, I learned, I read, I trialed and errored, I built, and I tried so many different things. So she was a bit of a guinea pig for me, over a 2 year period. But as it turns out, she did really well, when we worked together. So that led me to other athletes, and that's really the kind of the emergence of working with athletes too. So now my practice, and I've been doing this now probably between 15 and 20 years. My practice is typically split between corporate. So I coach right up to the C level in companies. So I typically start with the high performers. They ask me to take the high performer salespeople or whatever and build them into leadership capability. So, and then, like I said, I work into the C level. So that's the first part of the company. The second part of the company, which is really great, is the athlete part, where I work with some of the best teams and athletes in the world around performance and wellness. So this now, which is the part that we want to get to, I think, is working with equestrian athletes. And
Yeah. Sorry
yeah,
to interrupt. I was curious. So, how did you connect with equestrians? Because obviously, I do think that the mind is such a huge part of the sport. But I would say traditionally, people were a little hesitant, to say the least, to look at the mind part of the sport. I think everybody was always focused on the horses and how to better prepare them for events. But I feel like it's really only in the last 5 or 6 years that people have really looked at the mental health component of things. So I was curious, how did you come to riding?
yeah, just to build on what you said just for a second before I get to that, the mental health component obviously is critical, but also the focus has to also be on the rider. The focus has always been on, and this is one of the reasons I wrote the book in the first place, is, one of the advantages I do have of coming into equestrian sport initially without a lot of knowledge was I can bring in all these other ideas from other sports, these tried and tested and true ideas that work in other sports and I really felt like equestrian sport was so far behind in this area because the focus was so much on the horse and not on the rider. So I'm saying let's put focus on the rider here because the rider is the leader of the partnership. The rider is the critical piece that makes the partnership go. Obviously, you need the 50-50 split in the partnership between the horse and the rider, but the rider is critical and the rider's confidence and the rider's mental wellness is critical to the effectiveness and the success of the partnership. So anyway, getting back to we'll talk more about that, but getting back into, how I got into equestrian sport, a friend of mine knew what I did. Obviously, he was a friend of mine. I had talked to him about other athletes and other sports, and he was kind of followed my career. So his daughter was a meter 20 show jumper, and she was struggling. She was, having difficulty with just, I guess, just basic confidence. So that's basically how I started in the sport. And it was a very rough start because I basically knew nothing about the sport. Um, So, I went to shows, I talked to coaches, I worked with her, I read everything I could possibly get my hands on. I watched everything, I watched videos. I learned how to ride myself because I thought that was really critical to understanding the feelings of, it was a little bit of flatting and a little bit of jumping, but it still gave me the feelings of what it feels like and what the riders go through. So that was really important for me. And I don't do that in other sports, but in this sport, I really felt because of the nature of the partnership, the horse and the rider partnership, I had to do that.
Good for
So
you. That's a major undertaking.
yeah, it was a major undertaking, and it was a bit scary at the beginning because I knew nothing about it. So I had to overcome that a little bit, and but yeah, and I just love the sport. I love the people in the sport. I love the trainers, the riders, obviously, just everything around the sport. And it was so fun and inspiring too, Catherine, because it was so different and so new to me. And it was such a fantastic challenge at that point in my career. It was about 8 years ago that I started, and I would always work in the other sports, and I knew the other sports incredibly well, whether it was golf or tennis or football or soccer or volleyball or swimming or gymnastics, whatever it was. I worked in those sports and I knew the sports, but this was something new that I really, really loved. It was different, and it was a challenge for me to try to understand the synergy between the horse and the rider, and like you talked about too, the mental and emotional challenges of equestrian sport, of which there are many. And I would say that outside of golf, maybe it's the most difficult mental and emotional sport. It's just difficult, it's a difficult sport because there's so many factors involved in this whole thing. And the horse has to be right. You have to be right. Um, you have two kind of emotional minds too here. You've got the horse and you've got the rider, and you've got the horse's confidence and you've got the rider's confidence, and there's just so much dynamic that fascinated me. So, and that's why, I got to writing the book too, a few years ago, because I really felt working in the sport that there was a crisis of confidence in equestrian sport, and I had to write something and do something about it, and give the equestrian athletes a solution, or some solution, or an introduction to it at least. So Ride Big has been super, it's been a super project for me, and it's been very well received, and the feedback is always tremendous on the book. So I'm just so happy and pleased that I can help some people in the sport.
So let's start with just the title. Honestly, explain to our listeners where that came from, because I thought that that was quite interesting when I was just reading in the first few pages about Ride Big versus Ride Small, and your observation even without knowing who the horse and rider was.
Yeah, so that is a really good story. I eating with some riders in Wellington at WEF a few years ago, like I guess before I wrote the book in maybe 2018 or something. And we were sitting around and we were watching a five-star show class. I think it was Saturday Night Lights, or it was an evening class. So it was fun. We were all, having a drink and having a bite to eat, and the riders would come in, and somebody said to me, they said a rider would go in and then they'd come out, and one of the riders said to me, what did you think of that rider? And I said, oh, that rider's really riding big. And they said, what does that mean? And I said, well, it's writing in a very confident way, and here are the reasons why. Because I'm watching, I watch a class very intently. I watch the riders, I watch the mannerisms, I watch the body language, I watch the horse, I watch them come into the in gate, I watch them leave, I watch everything. So I gave them a laundry list of reasons why I thought that rider was riding big. They were riding very forward. The rollbacks were really tight. Everything was really, really good about the ride, and confident. And then another rider came in, And one of the other writers asked me, well, what did you think of that writer then? And I said, well, that writer's writing small. And then I gave them a list of reasons why I thought they were writing small, which obviously is the opposite of writing big, which is not very confidently at all. The writer was not writing forward. It didn't look like they were taking risks. They looked uncomfortable in the in gate. It just wasn't a smooth trip. So that's how it started, the ride big and ride small idea. So I would reference sometimes that people would be, if I watched them, they'd ask me, they say, what'd you think of that? And I say, well, you weren't riding as big as you could, or you were riding small. So that became the obvious title of the book is Ride Big. And everybody, I think, when you say it, knows what ride big means. It means essentially, very simply, riding in a very confident forward manner. So that's how it all started. It's kind of a fun story, and it was I guarantee it was a fun night. We had a really great night. There was a lot of laughs that night.
Yeah, it is interesting because I was thinking so many factors can impact your riding big or riding small. Like who knows what happened in the warm up or that day. Could be a horse had an issue that night that we weren't aware of, and so that's the reason the rider went in and typically may ride big but rode small that night. But yeah, just a fascinating sort of observation, even when you weren't a rider yourself. I liked that analogy. So let's go a little bit into the book because I know it's broken into three sections, and I feel like each one is significant in terms of helping riders. But I wanted to sort of start a little bit with the building blocks because one of the things that struck me in the sort of foundation was that you had a choice of what you could be focusing on as a rider, and I felt like what drew me was the one line of professionalism. And I feel personally, as an amateur rider, that's something that seems to be lacking in some of the new riders coming up through the ranks. That they don't do the preparation and they aren't in there with their horses day to day. And I know you and I had a conversation about this a few weeks back about just some of the top riders in the sport. They started from the ground up. So I was curious in terms of those, obviously studying yourself and knowing yourself, that's so key. And I think that's something that probably a lot of riders, myself included, don't necessarily do initially, or we do parts of it, but not really in depth enough. But can we speak a little bit to the professionalism side? Because I think you told me you've experienced it yourself when you're trying to coach some of these young riders down in Florida.
Yeah, first of all, Catherine, the first part of the book is basically about building a structure. And it's so critical for an athlete to, some of the things may seem obvious, the purpose, the values, all these different things, but they are so critical. You have to build that structure because you have to fill yourself with knowledge about yourself and have belief and awareness about yourself. And if you don't do that, then the gaps will be filled by something outside of you. So that's the big problem. And this happens a lot with kids where there's so many distractions now and so much going on outside of themselves, opinions and social media and expectations and all these things. And if you do not fill up that inner self with a really solid structure, then you're opening yourself up for those things to come in and fill the gaps. So this is why that first part of the book is really important. I am so big on structure. You have to fundamentally build these pieces because these are the bedrock of everything that you do in performance. So it's really important that you have to do that. Now, getting back to the professionalism, I always ask riders to create a value structure. So if I have a client, I ask them, we build out their values. because it's really important to know and understand what you believe in, because then decision making becomes very easy, and much simpler. So, one of the values that often a writer will choose is professionalism. And then I ask them to build it out. What does that look like every single day? What does professionalism look like? And you don't have to be a professional to have the value of professionalism, because having these sort of professional behaviors is really important in looking good, treating everybody with respect. And like you said, this goes back to the horsemanship too, right? Mucking the stall, getting in there with the horse, doing everything you have to do, really taking care of your tack, like making sure it's perfect and your boots are shiny, and just all of the things that the very best riders take care of. Like when you watch McLean Ward, his boots are perfect. His manner, he always looks the same. He always wears similar clothes. He treats people with respect. He treats people in the barn with respect. He's very professional about what he does. And I think that every rider can take a page out of that, because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel organized. It makes you feel prepared. And that is an element of confidence. So that's why the professional and the confidence are connected. So, and there's many pieces to professionalism if you think about it. It goes down, it's a long list, treating the horses well, having a plan of how you're going to approach, maybe it's a particular year. What do I want to accomplish this year? And oh, by the way, how am I going to do that? How am I going to accomplish those things? And what steps am I going to take to accomplish those things? So
So
all of,
just
yeah, go ahead.
So sorry, I was going to say that generates just those first initial remarks generate two questions from me. One is, how does a rider deal with if you have a trainer that isn't really supporting that professionalism? I don't know if you've seen it. I know myself, I've had that experience from time to time where they're not really on board with the professional side. They don't see you at the same level because you're, say, doing a meter 10, not the Grand Prix. Have you ever, I guess, had a rider speak to the trainer about the attitude there? Or have you ever suggested somebody move to another coach that maybe embraces their values? Because I see that as a challenge from time to time with amateur riders. So that's one question. And then the other question is, again, I find with a lot of young riders, sadly, I feel like they don't treat their parents very well. That's the one area of respect that you'll see is lacking. And I wondered how you address that.
Well, first of all, I think in what you're talking about with the trainer, all of those scenarios you suggested are likely outcomes. So the first one is the communication between a trainer and the rider has to be honest, truthful, and there has to be lots of it. I mean, the trainer has a major impact on your enjoyment in the sport, so it's very important. So, first of all, as a very general statement, you have to, as you have to find a horse that suits you. That's really important for the confidence, right? And you also have to find a trainer that suits you, that is of like mind that you are and wants the same things that you do. I mean, you're paying this person, they're working for you. So there has to be a really good synergy there. So the communication. So if, for example, you want to employ these ideas and behaviors of professionalism, then yes, of course, the trainer has to be on board because they have to promote that and support that. Now, if they choose not to, for some reason, I don't know why they wouldn't, but yes, it's time to move to a different trainer for sure, because I think that you have to share the values and have similar values, because it's a very intimate relationship between a coach and a rider. You go to a show, there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of trust going both ways. The rider trusting the trainer and the trainer trusting the rider. So that makes it an intimate relationship. So it's an important thing that you're definitely on the same page. So yes, and let's deal with the parent thing now. I think, yes, I've seen that too. And I think, you know, it's important that I think the parents demand some respect, because it's a difficult thing sometimes supporting an equestrian athlete, because not only is it expensive, but it's emotional. There's traveling, there's a lot of planning, family planning, and these sorts of things. So I think at the very least, the parents can demand respect from the child, and the child, or the young equestrian, has to kind of fall in line with that. In my opinion, I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess, sorry, I digressed a little bit there, but it was just what you were talking about sort of brought
Oh,
those
it's a great
questions to my
question.
head.
It's a practical, hey, Catherine, it's a practical question, because, you see that it's a privilege to be able to participate in equestrian sport and have these incredible animals. And somebody has to finance that. They're expensive. So it's really important that there's a respect between the parents and the young equestrian, because the parents have really, dedicated a lot, resources, time, summers, all those things. You know what kind of time it takes driving to shows and just everything. So I think, like I said, the parents at the very least, can demand that there is respect from the young equestrian athlete. And I would hope that in most cases, that the equestrian athlete appreciates what the parents do for them. That's really important.
Mm-hmm. And when we were talking about trainers, would you ever get involved in speaking with a trainer, sort of explaining to them maybe where the student's at in terms of needs?
Yeah, and very often, sometimes when I build out a plan, for example, so part of my role working with an equestrian athlete is building a really complex but efficient and inspiring plan for them. So when I work with an equestrian athlete, we profile them and we evaluate everything: technical, physical, mental, emotional, strategic, everything. And then we, based on all of the profiling, and it could take a couple of months to do it, we assess them and do all sorts of things. Then we put together a plan for them. And yes, the coach has to be a part of that because they have to support it. And often, I would say 99% of the time, they're 100% on board, because not only does it make the equestrian athlete better, but it just makes everything better. The relationship between the coach and the rider, the horse, the partnership, it just adds value to everything. And you have a happier, healthier client, also athlete. So, and I just, like the last couple of days, I just sent two out to coaches. Like, they're on the road, but I emailed and I said, can you add value to this, or can you make suggestions? Because often part of the part of the plan involves the technical aspects. What does the equestrian athlete need to develop technically in order to get to new levels? So you need really great input from the coach on what those things are going to be and what the plan's going to be to develop those things. So it could be their seat, it could be their hand position, it could be the leg, it could be many different aspects of the technical part of riding. So we always want to kind of always try to improve those things in training. And that's just one aspect of the plan. But yes, I have to have a great relationship with the coaches, but for the most part, I always have a fabulous relationship with the trainers.
That's good. As I said, I feel like that's something that I've seen can be challenging, even with the best. And I was also curious to see from your perspective, do you feel like changes with safe sport have also improved things from that level? Because, as you said, there is such a tremendous influence from the trainer with riders that they're coaching. And it seemed, I mean, because I've been in the sport for 35 years, I would say over the years, there were times where I felt there was, sort of an emotional dynamic that was maybe not so healthy for riders.
Yes.
Do you feel that safe sport has helped that along a little bit, or is it just changing times, more focus on mental health?
I think all of the above, Catherine. I think safe sport brings awareness to things and that it's a real thing. So now it's out in the open and all of a sudden people say, yes, that's something that I've experienced, or that's something that a friend of mine has experienced, or whatever. But yeah, I think the lines, obviously, the first step is the lines between the trainer and the rider have to be very, very clear. There has to be a lot of clarity there. But I think Safe Sport has done the job. I don't think it's perfect yet. Trust me on that, because I see it. But I think it has raised awareness, which I think is like always job one, right? Is step one to do that. But I will tell you, in other sports, boy, oh boy, working in sports for 20 years, I've seen some interesting things between coaches and athletes, and just even really toxic environments too, that the athletes have been sort of put into. And I've seen a lot in gymnastics. Gymnastics has always been that sport where there's a lot of kind of stuff going on behind the scenes, and some of the environments are quite toxic. But yeah, I think at equestrian sport, it's getting there. I don't think it's there yet, but I think the safe sport has sort of brought things to light a little bit. But I think there always needs to be work to be done in that area for sure. Just by the nature of, coaches working with young athletes.
Mm-hmm. So actually honed in on one of the exercises you suggested was the mindfulness exercise. And so I was going to ask you, what's one key thing that a rider can do in terms of mindfulness to better themselves for competition?
Mindfulness is a big area right now, Catherine, and it's really moved into sport where, I would think that probably when I first started working in sport, mindfulness kind of people were saying they were kind of chuckling about it, right? Oh, that's meditation. That's crazy stuff or whatever. And you'd be shocked that how many athletes now have a mindfulness practice. And I mentioned in the book too, there's so many great apps that athletes can go. And I typically, the first one I always typically recommend is Headspace, where you can go in and involve yourself in a mindfulness practice. It's not expensive. I think it's, $7 a month or something like that. But it's a very, very useful practice, because not only does it build the focus muscles, but it also trains you to be in the moment, which is critical in everything in life, not just sport. You want to be in the moment because fear is created on either side of the present moment. If you're thinking ahead too much, you're creating irrational thoughts, and irrational fears emerge out of that. If you're thinking backwards, if you're thinking about what happened or that mistake you just made, that's not good either. So you have to be able to have the capabilities of grounding yourself in the moment. The easiest, very practical way I talk about in the book, outside of, trying one of these apps. I recommend that people try the apps and go. It's not a big commitment. It's 10 minutes a day or 10 minutes every second day, where you listen to a voice and they take you through a process of mindfulness. And I think it's a valuable practice. But the obvious, very practical way to work on that is your own breath, because your own breath is immediate. It's the only thing in life. You're breathing. Every breath you take is absolutely in the moment. It has to be. So if you start focusing on your own breath and paying attention to your breathing, you can really bring yourself, not only can you calm things down a little bit, the process of breathing and taking deep breaths can really ground you and calm you. But this idea of focusing on the breath, because the breath is really the thing in life that is the most present moment, because you're doing it like you're continually doing it from moment to moment or from second to second. So a focus on the breath, if you get in the in gate or something and you're feeling like, you're starting to feel anxious, get on the breath, start focusing on your breath, bring yourself back to your breath. The worst thing equestrian athletes can do in the in gate is start filling your head with thoughts and ideas. And I always recommend to equestrians, when you get in the in gate, I'll give you one thought. That's it. You're allowed to have one thought. So if that's something you're working on in training with the coach, if that's something that you were flatting in the morning and you felt something and you feel like that can really help you in the ring, great, go with that. Or a really rhythmical, beautiful canter to the first fence. That's your thought. And then after that, no more thoughts. You let the training take over, you let the instincts take over, and you do not allow that thinking brain to run the show, because the thinking brain is very slow and it can't keep up. You have to run the show with the subconscious brain. So, and everything is in the subconscious brain, all your training, all your great ideas, everything is in there. So you have to trust that you can just turn off that thinking and just let it go and let it happen. And trust me on this, you will enjoy equestrian sport a lot more, and have more success in the sport if you do that. But if you start adding thoughts, a lot of people think that adding thoughts is better. It's the worst thing you can do in the in gate, or getting in the ring and adding 10 things. Oh my God, I got to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, I got to remember this, I got to do this, because that just slows things down and really sort of takes away from the experience. So I would say that for mindfulness, which you're interested in, I would say an app is great, and I like Headspace because it's sort of sport focused a little bit, and there's some sessions and some exercises that are sport focused on certain things in sport. But for a very super practical application, and this is all documented in the book too, really do it on the breath, do it on your breathing. That's a really good, because it's so portable, it's with you all the time, so it's really easy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was smiling when you were speaking because I know in the last 3 years I've adopted a relaxation breathing process. It's actually a Tony Robbins priming episode. It's like 8 minutes long, but it basically walks you through breathing. And I
Great.
find I have to do that before I ever get on. And I also this year adopted the song, How Are Things in Guacamole? I would sing that under my breath to my horse, and it seemed to relax both of us. But I was also smiling because I know a young amateur rider who always makes me laugh, because when she's at the in gate, she's literally screaming, I can't do this, I can't do this, I'm afraid, I'm terrified. But she always goes in the ring and is great. So I think that seems to be her shtick, but it is quite hilarious from the outside to watch. And that actually led me to a conversation I had last evening with somebody I ride with, and we were just talking about the way our brain works when we're in the ring. And I know that I read a line in your book that said something about, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was talking about this belief of going in to win versus just going in to be good. And I thought that is something I know myself I've struggled with. I haven't had necessarily a winning mentality. It's like I want to ride the course well and I want to finish in the top 6 or 7, but it's a very different stretch to get to that winning mentality. And this other woman said the same thing, that she felt like she doesn't she feels like she kind of curses herself if she goes in wanting to win, that she makes an error. So I wondered if you could speak to that, because that's also part of the voice and your confidence and how you're thinking.
Yeah, I think you have to be prepared to win. And obviously, I think everybody wants to win. I think we can agree on that. They want to win. But you do have to separate that sort of winning, I want to win mentality from the process, which is going in and, riding the best you possibly can, executing the best you possibly can, and focusing on the process of doing it. And then, often the result of that, if you do it really well, will be winning. So you have to disassociate yourself a little bit when you get into the ring about the winning. Obviously, you want to win, and that's okay. You're sort of thinking before, 20 minutes before you go to the warm-up ring, I'd like to win this class today. I really feel like I can win this class based on how I've been training, how I've been riding. So then you go and create the process to do that, which is riding your best, which is having the right ideas and thought in the in gate, and then executing your training. I mean, essentially, a show class for people is a treat. It's a reward because the amount of training and like think about the work you do in the winter time in the cold barns and everything, Catherine. And then, you're out in this beautiful environment in the summer, and people really need to create perspective around what the show really is. The show is a test of your training. You're testing your training to see, how is my training? How am I doing in my training? How are we doing as a partnership? And it's an opportunity to find that out. And the show, or the class that you're in, gives you the opportunity to do that. And the show is a treat. I mean, after all the work you do all winter in cold barns and people across North America doing, carting horses around and all this incredible amount of time, that amount of time is like 90% or more, 95%, and 5% is at the show. So you really, really have to put it in perspective and enjoy the show, because it really should be a treat and a reward. It's a reward for all the work you've done in equestrian sport. So, but all of it becomes a point of anxiousness for a lot of riders that, oh my God, I have to do well here. I'm at the show and people are watching and all this sort of thing. But all that has to dissolve and go away, and you get in the in gate and you say to yourself, okay, why am I doing this? I'm doing it because I love it, and because I love to connect with my partner and my horse, and I love the sport, and trying to maybe accept the challenge of it and see how well I'm doing. So that's really important, that perspective for riders to because I see a lot of anxiousness at shows. People get so anxious and so nervous about these show classes, where you really have to look at it as a reward for all the work you've done the entire year, training and everything. And ultimately, the only thing a show class is a test of your training.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I was also curious, would there be a different approach with an older amateur like myself versus a younger amateur in terms of building the confidence? Because I would say I feel fundamentally, as an older rider, you're aware of all the things that can go wrong.
Yes.
And if you've had any bad falls, even when they're not right in your head, I feel like they can hold you back from really letting go. So I was curious to see if you found, from your perspective in training or working with the different age groups, is there a slight difference in the approach because of that?
You know what, Catherine? I would say that every single rider is different. So you'll have fearless, mature riders, and you'll have fearful, potentially young riders too. But I would say generally, Yes. Mature riders, there's a fear of because the body is changing, um, and because you will, if you do, like get tossed or fall off the horse, you're going to feel it. So, um, in those cases, yes, there's a difference and there's a different approach, and we have to try to work on mitigating the fear so that there is enjoyment in the sport because a lot of fears, first of all, fear is an interesting thing. Most fear is irrational. So we create fear. And most fear is created sort of looking into the future and kind of creating those what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? When 99.9% of the time it's never going to happen. So you're creating the fear. But in equestrian sport, there's a real fear because there is a real chance of getting hurt. I mean, it's a dangerous sport. And when I interviewed McLean Ward in my book, and I talked to him many times about different things, and we talked about fear and I asked him, "Do you feel it?" Like he's in big show classes, and those meter 60 fences are high, um, and he said, yes, the fear in the sport is real. I don't feel the fear like the maybe the average person would because and Michael Young said the same thing to me too. I had many conversations and they were fascinating talking to him. Like that guy is incredible. Um, People will know him as, I mean, I've seen a lot of riders, Catherine, over the past 8 years, and he's the best rider I've ever seen. Like he stands out from the rest of the riders. There's something about him, his connection with the horses, the way he trains, everything he does is a bit different, but it's elite, the way he does things. And he said that he's fallen off 1,000 times, but he has a healthy respect. He says he doesn't really feel fear per se, but he has a healthy respect that something could happen and he's always aware of it.
Hmm.
So, in the case of older riders or mature riders, we always try to mitigate the fear. That's our first step. And that's done through safety equipment. That's done through ensuring that they're riding the right horse. The horse matches up with what their objectives are and what they're trying to do. They have the right trainer, all of those things. But I find that, it's really important for riders to pay attention to safety equipment and hat. Everyone should wear a vest. Everyone should wear a vest. And if you're not wearing a vest, you're taking a chance and you're kind of igniting, you could potentially be igniting the fear a bit too. But I think the vest does give you a little bit of confidence. Like if you watch the Olympics in Paris, a lot of the show jumpers look at Laura Kraut.
Mm-hmm.
She's wearing a vest in the show jumping classes. She's one of the best riders in the world, and she's wearing a vest. So, um, but I think that most amateurs should invest in wearing a vest. And that's just kind of a side note here, but we always
Mm-hmm.
try to find ways with the particular client or the rider to mitigate the fear. But yes, and I think it's natural that a mature rider may have a little bit more fear because if they do fall or if they do fall off, there's a greater chance of getting hurt for sure.
Mm-hmm. So another question I had for you that you sort of touched on just the pressure when you go to a horse show, there's people watching, what have you. I also wondered, do you feel that social media has a much bigger impact today as well on the confidence because of the fact that everything is broadcast? Years ago, we might have seen the video of our round at the end of the day in the video in demand place. Whereas now somebody's by the side of the ring taking a video on their phone of you and it's, up there for everyone to see 3 minutes later. Do you feel like that impacts confidence in riders?
100%. It's a major factor, especially with young riders, because young riders with the phones, with social media, with paying attention to what others are doing, and Part of the problem is that, riders, other riders, if they're peers or whoever they are posting their best classes or their best rides or their whatever it is. They're presenting themselves in this way where you're kind of looking at it and maybe saying, oh boy, I don't think I can do that. Or boy, that's really good. I don't think I'm quite there yet. Or I'm not quite there in my development. So you get into this comparison trap, which is can be incredibly damaging to confidence because you never want to compare. You always want to focus on your development, your riding, your everything, your training, the shows that you're in, and that's your focus, is what you're doing and not what others are doing. But it's so difficult when you have that phone in front of you because all these things are popping up. And if you're following whatever it is, if it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever the things are, and like you said, the videos are right there in front of you of others doing things, and typically people aren't going to post their poor rides or their poor classes. They're going to post the best classes. So you're always watching that. Um, so, they say that comparison is the thief of joy, and it really is. You have to be very careful with that, I think. And you're right too. Everything is so immediate these days. It used to be where, you had to wait to see things down the road, but now that if I want to see how Catherine's doing, I can literally see it 10 seconds after you ride your class. I can go on the internet and say, oh, Catherine finished 29th or Catherine finished third or whatever. So with the results being so immediate, people get in their minds that, people are creating opinions and expect certain things of them. So those things can be heavy too on a rider. So yes, 100% what you're talking about. The social media has changed the game.
Yeah, it's funny you say watching videos because before I even bought my horse, I was sent some videos of someone riding him. And I loved him, but I said immediately, wow, she's a really good rider. I don't know if I can ride that well. I don't know if he'll be happy with me. So it even impacted that part of the sport beyond, competing myself. But just a couple more questions I just wanted to ask because I want to be mindful of your time and you've
Hey,
spent a lot of time.
Catherine, one
Yes.
one really important point about what we just talked about, which I think is super important, is the idea of development. I think people today, especially at the higher levels, feel like because the results are so immediate, they have to develop quicker and more quickly, and they may push the development of the horse along too quickly. A horse has to develop, as you know, it takes time and they have to develop sort of in their own time, right? So I feel like these days, compared to, and I had a really great conversation with Harry Mead, the great eventer, and he talked about when he was young, it wasn't about the immediate results because people couldn't see your results. They weren't online. They don't know your results. So you really had a chance to work on the development of the horse and have that timeline. But he feels pressure now to get immediate results because people see his results immediately and they say, "Oh my God, Harry finished 30th. That's terrible." And he's mindful of that. So he's really had to make adjustments in his own mind about how he's doing things and the idea of making sure, not worrying about the results and making sure that he's taking his time developing the horses in the right manner and how he wants to develop the horses. So that's changed the development of the horses and the timeline of the development of the horses has sort of, shift the game a little bit too, which I don't think is right. That the horses need the time to develop, and you don't want to be pressured into, having to get results all the time.
You're so right there because I was thinking of two specific amateurs I have in mind that had 5-year-old horses and they were already wanting to push them into the 5-year-old development series, and those are big jumps, and I was thinking, what's the rush? This is a potential Grand Prix mount for you, give it, like you say, the time to develop and feel confident. Because even recently, I had a conversation with Beth Underhill, and she was talking about how when she got Altair, he was having a problem with combinations. And so, she stepped back with him and allowed him to get comfortable and build his confidence. And that was really important in terms of their, bottom line success at the end. So I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things I really wanted to ask you is, like, what's your favorite thing about what you do? Because you're very passionate about it, and I'm thinking, there's a reason for that. Obviously, you enjoy helping people and getting them to the next levels, but like, what would you say brings you the greatest joy in what you're doing?
It's you already said it. It's very to me, it's helping people. It's a real joy for me to be able to and equestrian sport really is about two things from my perspective, or for what I do. It's about achievement, yes, but more importantly, it's about enjoyment and enjoying the sport. And if I can help a person enjoy the sport and kind of stay out of their own way and really experience the joy, and we're just talking about equestrian sport here, but it's the same in everything I do. Um, my job essentially, if somebody asks me what I do, is, they, if they call me, they're in a particular spot in their life or in their sport career, and they're interested in going to this place over here. So they're here now and they want to go here. So my job is to close that gap and do it in a very efficient, um, healthy way, taking them from the point where they are to the point where they want to go. So, and it's a very technical process that requires a lot of experience, because there's a lot of moving parts in that to do that. And I don't do it only just move them there quickly so that they can experience it. I do it so that they can do it with enjoyment, with joy, and do it the proper way. And then, get to that point, because it's a journey too, and you have to really kind of take in the journey, and there's going to be bumps in the road along the way, as you know, there always is, right? Sport goes in cycles, it's up and down, but if we have the right plan, they will get to where they want to go. And we've had some really big successes with professional riders too, and taking them from where they never thought they could go to somewhere where they, a pretty special place. So that's fun. That's the joy in my work, the joy I get. I really enjoy helping people.
Close out, I did want to touch on the Serge Giroux Golf Dream Classic, because this is a foundation that I think is pretty near and dear to your heart. And I read up a little bit about it, and I thought it came from a really nice space. So I just thought maybe you could share that with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. That's something we wanted to do for kids in the community that we live in. I've had some experience sort of in the past with kids who haven't been healthy, who have had cancer or something that's really limited their ability to enjoy life. So we wanted to do something, but we wanted to do it, yes, for the child, but also for the family, because in these cases, the family goes through so much. It's crushing for a parent to see a child, who can't fulfill their potential or who is sick. And it's such a helpless feeling for the parents and even for the siblings too. It's terrible. So we created this foundation where we put together this once in a lifetime dream opportunity for them to join us. And we partnered with Disney, and we partnered with SeaWorld, we partnered with Cirque du Soleil in Orlando, and created all the backstage, behind the scenes, really, really cool things you could never normally get for these families. So we take them on a trip for a week. So I had sponsorship from some really super generous people. we had a golf event every year to raise money. We raised a lot of money each year for, or we do every year for the foundation. And then typically in October and November, we go down and treat them to this so they can forget about everything. We don't want them to think about needles and chemo and radiation and whatever they need to do to try to get the child healthy. And we've had some kids who have passed away too.
Mm.
We took them down and then, maybe a year or two later they passed away. So, but they had this, we had one little girl who passed away and she was buried in her Cirque du Soleil stuff that we got her in, yeah, in when we went on the trip. So the trip is a week long. It's an incredible, fabulous experience for all of us. I get as much out of it as or more than they do. So and we've been doing that for I think 20 years.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
No, I think that's lovely. It sort of speaks to your character. It's coming full circle with you wanting to give back. So thank you for sharing that with us.
We originally started as the Tiger Woods Classic. It was kind of a golf thing. So we took kids who had some interest in golf, but then it morphed into something much bigger than that, where it was beyond golf. And we tried to take the kids out though. We tried to take the kids and the families out for an hour and show them how to play golf, which was really fun and a lot of laughs.
I think it'd be fun to do that with horses.
Yes, it would. It would.
Maybe we can think about that in the future.
I'd love to. Yeah, whatever we can do to help, always.
Well, listen, John, it was really a pleasure getting to sit down with you, and I want to thank you so much for your time. And I'm hoping that some of our listeners will, go out, get the book Ride Big, because I think it could help, as you say, anybody. And particularly because I know there's also some, riders out there that are financially challenged, let's say, because they spend so much on their horses that they're thinking that sessions for them are maybe out of reach. But I think this book is very thorough and gives you a lot to think about and a lot to work with. So thank you so much again for writing the book. And thank you for taking time out to meet with me today.
Thank you, Catherine. I think it is important that, not only do riders work on the technical and the physical aspect of the sport, but they really dive into sort of this, you can call it whatever you want, the mental, the psychology, the emotional, they're all sort of linked together. It's the mind aspect of the sport, but I think it's a really good investment in your career as an equestrian to work on that part because you'll be more effective in the partnership. And I think it's something you can give to the partnership, right? Making yourself better in that aspect. So I think it's really important, not only for you, but for your horse too.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.